Welcome back, MC Time Trackers. Today, I'll take you on a journey through 5,000 years of Chinese history, from ancient dynasties to the rise of modern power. But this isn't just a history lesson. It's an English adventure through time. Every word you hear carries the spirit of emperors, warriors, philosophers, and dreamers who shaped one of the world's greatest civilizations. As we travel through China's past, you won't just learn history, you'll feel English come alive in every story we tell. So get ready to immerse yourself. Turn off distractions, open your mind, and let both language and history guide you through centuries of triumph, chaos, and rebirth. If you can't finish today's journey, don't worry, the past will wait for you. And before we begin, remember to subscribe and ring the bell so you'll never miss a story from the heart of history. Chapter 1. The Dawn of Chinese Civilization. For much of antiquity, the vast land of China was cloaked in mystery. To outsiders, it appeared only through fragments of the Silk Road, a trade network that hinted at a realm of extraordinary wealth, power, and refinement. While many neighboring civilizations rose and fell, China endured an unbroken chain of dynasties and emperors that would span millennia and shape one of the world's oldest continuous cultures. From building the longest structure on Earth, the Great Wall, to waging some of the most devastating wars in human history, China's story stretches back over 5,000 years, surviving the ancient era, the Middle Ages, and the modern world alike. Origins by the rivers. China's earliest settlements emerged along the fertile basins of the Yellow River, Huanghe, in the north, and the Yangtze River in the south. Early communities farmed the floodplains, cultivating millet and rice in abundance. But life was perilous. The Yellow River, often called China's Sorrow, flooded unpredictably, destroying crops and homes. Amid these hardships arose the legendary figure, Yu the Engineer, a man said to have tamed the raging waters. Yu's father, Gun, had spent a decade constructing dikes and dams to contain the floods, but his efforts failed repeatedly. Yu, undeterred by his father's misfortune, adopted a new approach. With the aid of the semi-mythical inventor Ho Yi, credited with introducing millet to humanity, Yu designed an intricate canal irrigation system. It diverted excess water to the sea while reserving enough for agriculture. His innovation ended generations of destruction. For this achievement, Yu was chosen as China's first ruler, marking the rise of the Xia dynasty, the first in China's long dynastic tradition. The Xia dynasty and the birth of dynastic rule. Under Yu the Great, the Xia thrived as an agrarian society. They developed early stone tools, refined lunar calendars, and organized their realm into 9 provinces, each governed by lords loyal to the emperor. After ruling for 45 years, Yu's age brought the question of succession. Breaking with custom, Yu chose his minister Gao Yao rather than his son Qi to rule after him. But Gao Yao's death forced a political crisis. The provincial lords, loyal to Yu's bloodline, demanded Qi ascend the throne. Their wish was granted, and thus began China's hereditary monarchy, where power passed through lineage rather than merit. This system would define China's imperial structure for thousands of years. However, by the 16th century BCE, the Xia dynasty had decayed under its last ruler, Jie of Sa. He was infamous for cruelty, indulgence, and tyranny, ruling through vengeance and pleasure rather than wisdom. Ancient belief held that heaven granted and withdrew the right to rule the mandate of heaven based on virtue. Under Ji's corruption, heaven's favor was said to have passed elsewhere. The Shang Dynasty. Bronze and Blood. A new power rose to challenge Jia rule. The Shang Dynasty, armed with revolutionary bronze weapons. Around 1600 BCE, the Shang overthrew Ji and established China's first historically recorded dynasty. Unlike the mostly mythic Xia, the Shang left a written record, the oracle bone inscriptions, etched on animal bones and turtle shells. Over 3,000 distinct characters have been discovered, many of which evolved into modern Chinese script. The Shang were both warlike and deeply spiritual. They expanded their territories through conquest, building fortified cities and conducting large-scale human sacrifices to appease gods and ancestors. Slaves were often buried alive with their masters, believed to serve them in the afterlife. Seashells were used as currency, and the society operated under a feudal system that enriched nobles while binding peasants to harsh labor. Despite frequent wars and internal unrest, forcing them to move their capital 5 times, the Shang dynasty endured for over 600 years. Driven by their mastery of bronze casting, chariot warfare, and organized governance. But their final ruler, King Zhou Dishen, repeated the sins of his Xia predecessor. Given to debauchery, he ruled through terror and excess, executing family members and hosting grotesque feasts while his empire weakened. The Zhou dynasty and the mandate of heaven. In 1046 BCE, a vassal state from the Wei Valley, the Zhou, rebelled. At the Battle of Muye, Zhou forces, supported by disillusioned peasants and defected slaves, annihilated the Shang army. Over 50,000 soldiers fell, and King Zhou, defeated, set fire to his palace, perishing amid his treasures. The Zhou claimed heaven's blessing and established the longest-lasting dynasty in Chinese history, ruling from 1046 to 256 BCE. During the Western Zhou period, the empire flourished under a feudal hierarchy, distributing land to loyal nobles. Innovations transformed China. Large-scale irrigation projects, expansive canal networks, and the rise of horseback travel. Bronze gave way to iron, as Chinese metallurgists, centuries ahead of Europe and the Middle East, perfected high-temperature furnaces to mass-produce weapons and farming tools. Eastern Zhou, philosophy and fragmentation. Yet power bred instability. Over time, local lords grew defiant, raiding the capital Haojing and forcing the Zhou court eastward to Luoyang. This marked the Eastern Zhou period, beginning in 771 BCE, a time of great turmoil, but also profound intellectual awakening. Out of this chaos emerged the 3 schools of thought: Confucianism, legalism, and Taoism. The philosopher Confucius, Confuzi, born in the state of Lu, devoted his life to moral reform. Orphaned young, he rose from poverty to become a scholar and minister. Witnessing centuries of moral decay, he taught that virtue and order arose from proper human relationships. His 5 bonds: ruler and subject, father and son, husband and wife, elder and younger brother, friend and friend, defined harmony as a balance of duty and respect. Confucius saw the family as society's foundation. Parents must guide with care, and children must honor them with obedience and service. The family's moral integrity, he believed, reflected that of the nation itself, and the ruler's role was to act as a father to his people. But not all agreed with Confucian optimism. Another school, legalism, argued that humans were inherently selfish and required strict laws and harsh punishments to maintain order. It would later become the philosophy of China's first imperial unifier. But that belongs to another chapter. Chapter 2: The Warring States and the Rise of Qin. Among the rival philosophies of the Zhou dynasty, legalism took a starkly different view of human nature. Its followers believed that a well-ordered society must be strictly controlled and that good citizens were those who submitted completely to authority. Discipline, not compassion, was the foundation of peace. Though opposed to Confucian ideals of moral virtue, legalism gained immense traction during the later Zhou era, influencing rulers who valued power and order over ethics. The third great philosophy to emerge in this age was Taoism, or Taoism, where legalism imposed control and Confucianism prescribed morality. Taoism sought harmony with the natural flow of the universe. Humanity, it taught, must follow the cosmic rhythm, the Tao, or way, rather than resist it. The iconic yin-yang symbol captures this belief. Opposite forces coexist in balance, and wisdom lies in accepting their interplay. Taoism celebrated simplicity, spontaneity, and non-action, a principle often summarized as Wu Wei, meaning to act without forcing. These three schools, Confucianism, legalism, and Taoism, became the philosophical pillars of Chinese civilization, shaping its politics, religion, and ethics for millennia. Their flourishing during the Zhou era was later known as the 100 Schools of Thought, a golden age of ideas that laid the foundations of Chinese intellectual history. The Warring States period. Even as thinkers pondered the nature of virtue and power, the Zhou realm fractured. Regional lords, once loyal vassals, began declaring themselves independent kings. The central authority of the Zhou emperor eroded, giving way to a century of conflict among 7 rival states: Qin, Han, Zhao, Wei, Chu, Yan, and Qi. This turbulent age, from the 5th to the 3rd centuries BCE, became known as the Warring States period. It was during this era that the strategist Sun Tzu composed The Art of War, the world's earliest treatise on military science. His lessons on deception, timing, and adaptability reflected the brutal reality of the age. Warfare had evolved armies numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Campaigns lasted months or years, and success depended as much on cunning as on courage. The rise of Qin. Amid the chaos, one state grew stronger than all others. Qin, led by the ambitious Ying Zheng, later known as Qin Shi Huang, meaning first emperor of Qin. Born in a harsh frontier land, Ying Zheng understood that survival depended on military might. The Qin developed advanced iron weapons, crossbows, and strict discipline, allowing them to dominate weaker neighbors. The first to fall was Han, a small state trapped in central China, vulnerable on all sides. Within a year of invasion, Qin forces crushed Han's defenses and forced King An of Han to surrender. Their next target was Zhao, whose lands had already suffered a devastating defeat decades earlier at the Battle of Chongping, where over 700,000 soldiers perished. Despite past losses, Zhao still possessed a formidable general, Li Mu, renowned for his brilliance in both defense and offense. Again and again, he thwarted Qin advances. Realizing that brute force could not defeat him, Ying Zheng resorted to subterfuge. He bribed Zhao officials and spread false rumors that Li Mu plotted rebellion. Deceived, King Yumiu of Zhao executed his loyal general and with him his kingdom's last hope. In 228 BCE, Qin armies seized the Zhao capital, Handan, and the state collapsed soon after. The failed assassination. Next, Ying Zheng turned toward Yan. Desperate, Crown Prince Dan of Yan devised a desperate plan. Assassination. He recruited Jing Ke, a famed assassin, to kill the Qin king with a poisoned dagger hidden inside a rolled map. To win an audience, Jing Ke brought what appeared to be peace offerings, the head of a defected Qin general, Huan Yi, and the map of fertile Dukong lands coveted by Qin. But when Jing Ke lunged with his dagger, Ying Zheng narrowly escaped. Chaos erupted in the palace as the assassin chased the fleeing king around a pillar. With his sword too long to draw swiftly, Ying Zheng dodged until a court physician hurled his medicine pouch at the attacker, buying the king precious seconds. Ying Zheng then struck back, stabbing Jing Ke repeatedly. The assassin missed with his final throw and was cut down. The attempt failed spectacularly, enraging the king further. In 226 BCE, Qin armies invaded Yan, captured the capital Ji, and forced King Shi of Yan to execute his own son, Prince Dan, as an apology. The act delayed annexation only briefly. Yan fell completely by 222 BCE. Conquest and unification. Ying Zheng's next campaigns targeted Wei and Chu simultaneously. In 225 BCE, his generals, the father-son duo Wang Jian and Wang Ben, launched dual offensives. Wang Ben besieged Wei's capital Daliang, diverting the Yellow River to flood the city. Over 100,000 people died, and Wei surrendered soon after. Wang Jian, commanding an army of 600,000, turned his forces against Chu, a powerful southern state. Though the first invasion failed, he returned 2 years later with overwhelming strength, capturing the Chu capital and its king. By 221 BCE, only Qi remained. Isolated and weary, the Qi king surrendered without resistance. The wars that had torn China apart for centuries were finally over. Ying Zheng proclaimed himself Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of a unified China, the Qin Empire. The Qin dynasty lasted only 15 years, 221–206 BCE. Yet its impact was immense. From the Qin came China's very name. Unlike the feudal Zhou, the Qin established a centralized bureaucracy, registering every citizen, taxing directly through the state, and dividing the land into provinces governed by imperial appointees. Ying Zheng standardized currency, weights, and the writing system, binding the realm together. But his rule was harsh. As a devout legalist, he believed fear was the foundation of order. Harsh collective punishments were imposed even on officials and soldiers. One man's failure meant death for his entire unit. Peasants labored endlessly in the fields or weaving silk, while entertainment theater, dance, and games like kuju, an early form of football, offered rare respite. women lived under strict patriarchy, confined to domestic life and denied most rights. The emperor's tyranny bred resentment at home and drew constant threats from the Xiongnu, nomadic horsemen on China's northern frontier, the ancestors of the Huns. Yet, for all its brutality, Qin rule forged something lasting. The first unified Chinese empire, disciplined, centralized, and bound by one ruler, one script, and one identity. Chapter 3. The Great Wall, the death of the first emperor, and the rise of Han. The Qin Empire's rapid expansion exposed a new vulnerability: its vast and open frontiers. To secure the northern borders from nomadic incursions, Qin Shi Huang began one of history's most ambitious construction projects, a Great Wall. The first Great Wall. Walls and fortifications had existed in northern China since the 5th century BCE, but Qin Shi Huang was the first ruler to envision them joined into a single continuous barrier. The emperor's command united these scattered ramparts into a defensive line stretching thousands of li. Transporting materials across the rugged landscape proved arduous, so laborers used whatever they could find: stone in the mountains, rammed earth on the plains. The workforce consisted largely of peasants and convicts, many sent there as punishment for laziness or poor harvests. Conditions were brutal, and countless workers perished in the process. The emperor never viewed this first wall as a permanent structure, but his vision laid the foundation for later dynasties. Over successive centuries, his fortifications would evolve into the monumental Great Wall of China still visible today. The emperor's quest for immortality. Having unified the warring states, at only 38, surviving 3 assassination attempts, and now guarding his realm with walls of stone, Qin Shi Huang faced a single undefeated enemy: death. In middle age, he became obsessed with achieving eternal life. Legends spoke of Penglai, a mystical island in the eastern seas whose mountains held the elixir of immortality. The emperor dispatched fleets of alchemists and explorers to find it. The most famous of these was Xu Fu, who led an expedition of 3,000 boys and girls and 60 ships. When he returned empty-handed, Xu Fu claimed that a sea monster had blocked their path and demanded archers for another attempt. The emperor complied, but the alchemist never returned. Most historians believe Xu Fu sailed east and settled in Japan, founding early colonies there. Madness and tyranny. As his hope waned, the emperor turned inward. He began consuming immortality potions, prepared by his own alchemists, mixtures rich in mercury, which slowly poisoned him. During this same period, paranoia overtook reason. Determined to erase ideologies that challenged his rule, he ordered the infamous book burnings and scholar burials. Some 460 Confucian scholars were buried alive, and thousands of texts destroyed. It was the first recorded instance of state-sanctioned book burning in human history. Ironically, his desperate search for longevity brought about his demise. In 210 BCE, at the age of 49, the first emperor died on a journey through eastern China, undone by his own elixirs. The Terracotta Army. Before his death, Qin Shi Huang had commissioned a vast mausoleum, an underground empire meant to mirror his own. Buried within were treasures, monuments, and thousands of life-size terracotta warriors to accompany him in the afterlife. Each statue bore unique facial features and armor according to rank, armed with real bronze weapons never used in battle. The site remained hidden until 1974 CE, when farmers near Xi'an unearthed fragments while digging a well. Archaeologists soon uncovered an entire subterranean army, over 7,000 figures now called the Eighth Wonder of the World. Collapse and Civil War. After the emperor's death, his chief minister Li Si concealed the news to manipulate the succession, transporting the decaying body back to the capital in a wagon filled with rotting fish to mask the smell. Li forged a decree ordering the heir Fusu and a rival general to commit suicide. With both dead, the throne passed to another son, Qin heir Shi, a weak and indulgent ruler. Li Si soon fell from favor. Accused of treason, he was executed by Lingqi, the death of 1,000 cuts, along with his entire family to the third degree. The once iron empire crumbled into chaos. Peasant uprisings erupted across the land, led by a former commoner named Liu Bang. The rise of the Han. Liu Bang defeated rival warlords in the Battle of Geishia, where over 100,000 men were killed or captured, and in 206 BCE proclaimed a new dynasty, the Han. Taking the imperial title Emperor Gaozu, he established his capital at Chang'an, one of the few Qin palaces left intact. From this city, the Western Han would rule China for over 2 centuries, from 206 BCE to 9 CE. More than 90% of modern Chinese trace their ancestry to the Han people, whose empire rivaled Rome in size and sophistication. Coming from humble origins, Gaozu reduced taxes, freed many slaves, and reinstated Confucianism as the moral foundation of government. The Imperial Academy trained officials in the Confucian classics, and a civil service system selected bureaucrats by merit rather than birth, a system that would endure until 1912 CE. Threats and expansion. The Han still faced old enemies, the Xiongnu nomads of the northern steppe. After suffering humiliating defeats, Gaozu sought peace through diplomacy, sending wine, silk, and women as yearly tribute. He died in 195 BCE, leaving the throne to his son Emperor Hui, though real power rested with Empress Lu, Gaozu's ruthless widow. She murdered rivals, even Lady Qi, the emperor's favored concubine, mutilating her body in grotesque vengeance. Despite these dark beginnings, later Han rulers stabilized the realm. In 141 BCE, Emperor Wu ascended the throne, ruling for 57 years. Under him, China expanded south into modern Vietnam and Myanmar, and westward into Central Asia. His generals opened a trade corridor linking China with India, Persia, and the Mediterranean, the legendary Silk Road, named from the Greek Ceres, land of silk. For over 1,500 years, this route would carry goods, technologies, and ideas, including Buddhism, between East and West. Yet conquest came at a cost. Prolonged wars drained the treasury and taxed peasants heavily, sparking revolts. In 9 CE, the official Wang Mang seized power, founding the short-lived Xin dynasty. His idealistic land reforms and natural disasters provoked chaos, giving rise to rebellions such as the Red Eyebrows and Lulun. After Wang's death in 23 CE, a Han prince, Liu Xiu, Emperor Guangwu, restored order, re-establishing the dynasty's capital at Luoyang. This revival marked the beginning of the Eastern Han. an era of renewed prosperity, learning, and the enduring dominance of Confucian ideals. Chapter 4: The Eastern Han's Golden Age and the Road to Tang. The Eastern Han Dynasty ushered in a second golden age for China. Building on the strong administrative foundations laid by Emperor Guangwu, the court established a new system for selecting officials. Local governors would nominate young men who best embodied Confucian virtue for government service. This ensured a bureaucracy grounded in moral discipline rather than aristocratic privilege. A flourishing empire. During the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, the Han Empire reached new heights of prosperity. Agricultural reforms, trade, and population growth fueled a booming economy, while education and Confucian scholarship thrived. The Han military dominated East Asia with superior weapons, crossbows, iron swords, and axes, enabling Chinese forces to strike enemies from afar and overwhelm them in close combat. Resistance in Vietnam and Korea was crushed, and the Xiongnu tribes who rebelled within Han territory were decisively defeated. The invention of paper during this era revolutionized administration and education, allowing for the wider spread of knowledge. Yet as civil servants gained prominence, the emperor's role diminished. Scholars and bureaucrats became the true power behind the throne, while many emperors retreated into luxury and indulgence. Without strong central leadership, governance grew corrupt, taxes rose, and famine spread across the countryside. The Yellow Turban Rebellion. Amid the suffering, a Taoist healer named Zhang Jiao proclaimed that the Han had lost the mandate of heaven, declaring, "The blue heaven is dead, the yellow heaven will rise." He led the Yellow Turban Rebellion in 184 CE, rallying hundreds of thousands of peasants under yellow scarves. They stormed government offices and looted villages, spreading chaos across the empire. Though imperial forces eventually crushed the uprising, the Han never recovered. To defeat the rebels, the court had relied heavily on regional warlords, granting them armies and autonomy. When the rebellion ended, these warlords refused to relinquish power. China once again fragmented into rival states, marking the end of the Han dynasty. The Three Kingdoms. By the early 3rd century, 3 great powers remained: Wei, Wu, and Shu Han. Shu, the smallest and least populated, fell first after exhausting itself in wars with Wu. Then Wei itself was usurped by a rising aristocratic clan, the Jin, who soon defeated Wu in 280 CE, reunifying China for the first time in nearly a century. The decadence of the Jin dynasty. The Jin dynasty began with Emperor Wu of Jin, whose reign became infamous for extravagance and indulgence. After conquering Wu, he filled his palace in Luoyang with 5,000 women from the conquered lands. Unable to choose among them, he devised a bizarre method. He would ride in a goat-drawn carriage, stopping to spend the night wherever the goats halted. To attract his attention, the women scattered bamboo leaves and salt outside their chambers to lure the animals. For 8 years, the emperor pursued this nightly ritual, even banning new marriages so that he could claim any woman he desired. When Emperor Wu died in 290 CE, the dynasty descended into chaos. A brutal civil conflict known as the War of the Eight Princes erupted as royal factions vied for control, inviting nomadic tribes such as the Xiongnu into the struggle. The invaders soon turned on their employers, seizing northern China. The Jin court fled south, establishing a new capital at Zhongshan, modern Nanjing. For centuries, China remained divided between northern kingdoms ruled by non-Han peoples and southern dynasties claiming the Jin legacy. It was not until 581 CE that the nation was reunited under the Sui dynasty, marking a new chapter in China's turbulent history. The Sui dynasty, a bridge between eras. Though the Sui ruled for only a short time, 581–618 CE, their reign was transformative. They restored Han Chinese rule, promoted Confucianism and Buddhism, and began integrating nomadic peoples into Chinese society. Emperor Wen of Sui, raised by a Buddhist nun, fostered religious tolerance and learning. However, his successor, Emperor Yang Guang, proved reckless and cruel. Obsessed with grand construction projects, he overworked millions, rebuilding sections of the Great Wall and digging vast canals. His disastrous wars against Goguryeo, Korea, led to staggering losses as high as 90% of his army and widespread rebellion. The rise of the Tang. Out of this chaos emerged a father and son destined to found one of China's greatest dynasties, Li Yuan and Li Shimin. Li Yuan, born in 566 CE, was a respected general with family ties to the imperial court. His son Li Shimin was a bold strategist celebrated for his victories against the Turks. Facing Emperor Yang's tyranny and the collapse of the Sui, they reluctantly turned to rebellion. Fearing for his family, Li Yuan hesitated, but Shimin convinced him that revolt was their only chance for survival. As Yang Guang slaughtered his own generals in paranoia, the Lis gathered support from soldiers and peasants furious at the endless wars. Li Yuan secretly evacuated his relatives from the capital and marched on Chang'an, the heart of the empire. Their forces united with another rebel army led by Princess Pingyang, Li Yuan's daughter, who commanded 70,000 troops. Together they seized the capital while Emperor Yang was away in the east. Betrayed by his own officials, Yang Guang was murdered, and the Sui dynasty collapsed in 618 CE. Li Yuan declared himself Emperor Gaozu of Tang, founding a new dynasty that would preside over one of the most prosperous and culturally radiant eras in Chinese history. The dawn of the Tang Golden Age. Under Tang rule, China's population surged from 50 to 80 million. Trade flourished, and art and science blossomed. The Chinese would later look back on this period with immense pride, so much so that overseas Chinese communities still refer to themselves as Tang people, Tang Ren, and their enclaves abroad as Tang Streets, Tang Renjie. But peace did not come easily. Even as the Tang rose, threats surrounded them: rival kingdoms to the east, and the ever-dangerous Turks to the north. And within the imperial family itself, a bitter feud would soon erupt, one that would shape the destiny of the dynasty itself. Chapter 5. The Rise of Taizong and the Twilight of the Tang. The rivalry among the sons of Li Yuan, founder of the Tang dynasty, came to a violent end in one of the most dramatic events in imperial history. The ambitious princes Li Jiancheng and Li Yuanji, resentful of their younger brother Li Shimin's growing fame as a general, saw disorder on the northern frontier as a perfect chance to eliminate him. The Shu-Wan-Wu Gate Incident. When the Turks threatened Chang'an in 626 CE, Li Yuanji petitioned their father to let him command the army. The emperor hesitated. He had first intended to send the proven hero Li Shimin, but finally agreed. Behind the scenes, the two elder brothers plotted their coup. Jiancheng promised Yuanji the title of crown prince once the deed was done, and together they prepared to ambush Shimin on his return. But the younger prince struck first. Shimin secretly reported to his father that Jiancheng and Yuanji had seduced imperial concubines, prompting the emperor to summon them to court. Suspicious of a trap, Yuanji urged his brother to feign illness and stay home, but Jiancheng insisted they face their father and clear their names. As they approached the Xuanwu Gate, the northern entrance to the palace city of Chang'an, they realized too late that they had walked into their brother's snare. From behind the gate, Li Shimin charged forward on horseback. He drew his bow and loosed an arrow that struck Jiancheng in the chest, killing him instantly. Yuanji fled, pursued through the courtyards, but Shimin's ally, Yuqi Jingde, intercepted and shot him down. The coup was complete. The emperor, stunned by the bloodshed, named Shimin crown prince. The sons of Jiancheng and Yuanji were executed to prevent further revolt. Li Yuan soon abdicated, taking an honorary role, while the victorious general ascended the throne as Emperor Taizong. Emperor Taizong's reign. The new ruler inherited a fragile empire and a pressing threat. The Turks still encamped near Chang'an. Recognizing China's weakness, Taizong pursued diplomacy rather than battle, paying annual tribute and waiting for internal strife to divide his enemies. At home, he focused on rebuilding trust and stability. Taizong appointed officials for talent rather than birth, even welcoming capable men who had once served his rival brothers. He encouraged free speech in court, inviting ministers to criticize his policies openly. His reign ushered in one of the most prosperous eras in Chinese history, an age later scholars would call the High Tang. When civil war broke out among the Turkic tribes in 628 CE, a minor Khan named Ashina Shibobi sought the emperor's help. Taizong seized the chance. By 630 CE, his armies and their allies crushed the Eastern Turkic Khanate, and the tribes proclaimed Taizong their overlord, honoring him as both Emperor of China and Heavenly Khan. Under his rule, Chang'an became the largest and most cosmopolitan city on Earth, home to nearly 2 million people. Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism all flourished side by side. Art, poetry, and porcelain craftsmanship reached dazzling new heights, while Chinese influence extended deep into Korea, Vietnam, and Central Asia, linking the empire with the Mediterranean world. Stability at home allowed expansion abroad. Prosperity bred power. Taizong's successors continued his legacy, and by the early 8th century, the Tang realm stood unmatched. The reign of Emperor Xuanzong, r. 712-756 CE, began as the zenith of this golden age, but it would end in catastrophe. The Anlushan Rebellion. In his later years, Xuanzong withdrew from governance, entrusting affairs to the shrewd yet ruthless minister Li Linfu. Li consolidated power through executions and intrigue, introducing a dangerous policy. The empire's military governors were to be non-Han generals, so that no Chinese noble could threaten him. One of these commanders was a gifted Turkic Sogdian officer, Anlushan. who led more than 150,000 troops in the northeast. Charismatic and skilled, he gained the emperor's favor and was even titled Prince of Yan. But after Li Linfu's death, rivals sought to sideline him. Feeling betrayed, and Lu Shan rebelled in 755 CE, declaring himself emperor of a new Yan dynasty. His forces swept south, seizing Luoyang, the eastern capital, and advancing toward Chang'an. The initial Tang defense collapsed. At Yangchu, the rebels suffered a setback, but Tang command blunders soon reopened the road to the capital. As the Yan army approached, panic gripped the court. Emperor Xuanzong fled west toward Sichuan, dragging his household and guards through treacherous mountains. Starvation, confusion, and mutiny tore through the convoy. Soldiers, crazed with hunger, demanded executions of the emperor's relatives. Xuanzong, powerless, watched family members strangled before his eyes. Meanwhile, the rebels entered Chang'an, looting the city and massacring thousands. By August 756 CE, the capital burned while the emperor abdicated in Sichuan, ceding the throne to his son Suzong. Collapse and aftermath. Under Suzong, Tang loyalists regrouped. Defector General Zhu Wen and allied Turkic mercenaries helped reclaim the capitals, while internal strife consumed the Yan regime. Paranoid and morbidly obese, and Lu Shan flogged his subordinates at whim until, in 757 CE, his own son and King Shu murdered him. Qingshu carried on the war, besieging Suyang in one of the grimmest battles of Chinese history. After months of starvation, Tang defenders resorted to cannibalism. Only 400 survivors remained of tens of thousands. Although the city fell, the rebellion soon disintegrated under the weight of its own brutality and political chaos. By 763 CE, Tang forces retook the heartland, but victory came at a devastating cost. And Lu Shan's uprising killed nearly 1/5 of China's population, perhaps 30 million people, and shattered the empire's economy. Never again would Tang authority reach its former glory. The long decline. Through the 9th century, weakened emperors presided over a fracturing state. Northern and western territories fell to Turks and the Tibetan Empire, while within China, corruption and famine bred bandit armies. In 875 CE, a salt smuggler named Huang Chao led yet another peasant rebellion, slaughtering merchants and nobles alike. By 881 CE, his forces captured Chang'an, and he crowned himself emperor of the Great Qi. But Huang's rule collapsed almost immediately. Famine ravaged the capital, and his troops turned to plunder. The Tang general Zhu Wen, once his ally, defected and led imperial troops bolstered by Turkish auxiliaries to retake the city. In 884 CE, Huang Chao was killed, his corpse marking the symbolic end of China's last great golden age. Chapter 6. From the fall of Tang to the dawn of the Mongol storm. The death of the rebel Huang Chao in 884 CE marked the official end of the Tang dynasty's golden age. His legacy remains deeply divided. To some, he was a butcher and traitor, responsible for unspeakable atrocities during his rebellion. To others, a folk hero, a peasant who rose against a corrupt, decadent empire. Yet regardless of intent, his rebellion had destroyed what little strength the Tang government retained. The imperial court was shattered, its armies scattered, and its authority confined to little more than the capital itself. The invention that changed the world. Despite this bleak backdrop, one of humanity's most transformative inventions emerged within Tang China's waning years. Around 850 CE, an anonymous Taoist monk and alchemist accidentally created gunpowder while seeking an elixir of immortality. Combining 75% saltpeter, 15% charcoal, and 10% sulfur, he instead produced an explosive mixture that set his dwelling ablaze. Though initially seen as a failed experiment, this discovery would ultimately reshape global warfare. Gunpowder would later join paper, printing, and the magnetic compass as one of the four great inventions of China, innovations that changed the course of civilization. At the time, however, the Tang Empire was too weak to harness the power of this new substance. China soon splintered into chaos. The 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms. The century following Tang's collapse was among the most chaotic in Chinese history. A period known as the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, 907–960 CE. Across the north, 5 successive dynasties rose and fell in rapid succession, while 10 smaller kingdoms flourished in the south and west. Like the earlier Warring States era, alliances shifted constantly. Assassinations, betrayals, and coups became commonplace. The first of the northern dynasties was founded by the warlord Zhu Wen, a ruthless opportunist who had once served both the rebel Huang Chao and the Tang court. In 904 CE, Zhu murdered the Tang emperor and placed the emperor's young son on the throne as a puppet. 3 years later, he usurped the throne outright, declaring himself emperor of later Liang, the first of the 5 dynasties. But Zhu Wen's cruelty knew no limits. He was infamous for raping his son's wives and conscripting noblewomen into his palace. His son soon turned on him. In 912 CE, he was murdered by his third son, Zhu Yugui, who was himself assassinated within a year by another brother, Zhu Yuzhen. Endless civil strife. The Liang's rule was challenged by a rival kingdom in the north, the state of Jin, founded by the warlord Li Keiyang, a former Tang general who had survived Zhu Wen's assassination attempts. His son Li Kengshu carried on the struggle, and by 923 CE, he overthrew the Liang, establishing the later Tang dynasty. Li Kengshu claimed to restore Tang's glory, but greed and corruption doomed his reign. His hoarding of wealth and neglect of soldiers sparked a mutiny in 926 CE, ending his life and dynasty. Next came the later Jin, founded by Shi Jingtang, another ambitious general. Lacking the strength to secure power alone, he allied with the Khitan, a powerful nomadic people ruling Northeast Asia. In exchange for military aid, he ceded to them the 16 prefectures, a crucial stretch of territory, including modern Beijing and Tianjin, and acknowledged their emperor, Yalu de Guang, as his overlord. This humiliating concession enraged many Chinese, and when Xi's successors sought independence, the Khitan retaliated, invading and establishing their own Liao dynasty, 947 CE. Their brutal conquest of Kaifeng and the slaughter of tens of thousands left northern China in ruin. Shortly after, a Chinese rebel named Liu Zhuyuan seized power, founding the later Han dynasty, but his rule lasted only a year before his teenage son was overthrown by the minister Guo Wei. who established the later Zhou in 951 CE. It was the last of the five dynasties, a brief but relatively stable regime that served as a bridge to reunification. The Song Reunification. In 960 CE, the brilliant general Zhao Kuangyin, commander of the later Zhou army, staged a bloodless coup. Crowned as Emperor Taizu of Song, he quickly subdued rival warlords and unified most of China, ending the anarchy of the five dynasties and 10 kingdoms. The Song dynasty, 961,279 CE, became a beacon of cultural refinement. Scholars, engineers, and artists thrived. Civil service examinations were expanded, and Neo-Confucianism, a renewed interpretation of Confucian values, guided political philosophy. Yet the Song emperors were scholars, not warriors. Militarily, they remained vulnerable to the powerful Khitan Liao to the north. In 1126 CE, the Jurchen tribes, descendants of the Khitan's vassals, rose up and founded the Jin dynasty, invading the Song capital Kaifeng and seizing northern China. The remnants of the empire fled south, establishing the Southern Song dynasty with its capital at Linnan, modern Hangzhou. The Southern Song Renaissance. Despite their territorial losses, the Southern Song presided over a remarkable economic and cultural resurgence. Agricultural reforms allowed peasants to own land and trade surplus rice, driving population growth and urban prosperity. The world's first paper currency circulated, printed on new mechanical presses. Chinese navigators perfected the magnetic compass, transforming global sea travel. Engineers adapted gunpowder for military use, launching bombs from catapults and inventing primitive rockets. The Southern Song's navy became the most advanced in the world, defeating larger enemy fleets with gunpowder weapons. Yet their armies could not reclaim the north. Captured artisans revealed Song technologies to their enemies, evening the balance of power. Culturally, the dynasty flourished. Artists painted tranquil landscapes of villages and rivers, celebrating family and nature. Philosophers revived Confucian ideals, emphasizing social harmony and moral duty in times of uncertainty. But no art or philosophy could shield China from the coming storm. A new force was rising on the steppe. The birth of Genghis Khan. In 1162 CE, a boy named Temujin was born into the Borjigin clan of Mongolia, destined to become Genghis Khan, one of history's most formidable conquerors. According to legend, he entered the world clutching a blood clot, a sign of divine fate. His early life was harsh. Rival tribes poisoned his father, leaving his family destitute and abandoned. As a child, Temujin hunted to survive and endured betrayal, conflict, and captivity. At just 13, he killed his half-brother Bektar in a quarrel, his first act of bloodshed in a life that would soon reshape the world. By the time he reached manhood, the orphaned outcast of the steppes was already uniting the scattered tribes of Mongolia, and China would be the first great empire to face his wrath. Chapter 7. The Mongol Storm and the Rise of the Yuan Dynasty. At 15, the young Temujin, later known to the world as Genghis Khan, was captured by a rival clan and enslaved. Yet even in captivity, his resourcefulness shone. He escaped by hiding inside the tent of a guard who had failed to raise the alarm. For 3 days he lay in silence, threatening to expose the man's negligence unless he helped him flee. In exchange for secrecy, the guard gave Temujin a horse, and one night, under the vast Mongolian sky, the future conqueror rode to freedom. The making of a Khan. At 16, Temujin returned to the camp of Borte, the bride promised to him in childhood. Her father welcomed him with joy, gifting him a fine sable cloak. Temujin immediately offered it to Togrul, a powerful tribal leader, securing his first important alliance. Through diplomacy and charisma, he began to rebuild his family's lost status. But his rise was not without tragedy. A raiding party of Merkits, one of the 5 major confederations of the steppe, attacked Temujin's camp and kidnapped Berte. Determined to avenge her, he rallied allies from neighboring clans, assembling an army of thousands. In a brutal counterattack, he destroyed the Merkit stronghold, rescuing Berte, who was now pregnant after months of captivity. She bore a son, Jochi, whose uncertain paternity haunted him all his life. Over the following decade, Genghis and Berte had 3 more sons and 4 daughters, and the Mongol Confederation steadily grew under his command. His friendship with the noble Jamuka, once his closest companion and sworn blood brother, turned to rivalry as ambition divided them. Some chronicles blame Berte's jealousy and rumors she spread for driving the men apart. Whatever the cause, Jamuka and Genghis gathered rival coalitions and prepared for war. War on the steppe. In 1187 CE, the 2 forces met at the Battle of Dalan Baljut. Jamuka led 30,000 warriors and crushed Genghis's smaller army in a bloody confrontation. After the victory, Jamuka's cruelty shocked even the hardened steppe. He boiled 70 captured youths alive and mutilated their bodies as a warning. His brutality backfired. Thousands of his men defected to Genghis, who vowed never to repeat such savagery. Temujin's discipline, charisma, and tactical genius soon won him the loyalty of most Mongol tribes. By the early 13th century, he had united them under his rule. In 1206 CE, at a grand assembly of chiefs known as the Kurultai, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. The conquest of China begins. The newly formed Mongol nation now faced outward. China was divided. The Jin dynasty ruled the north, the Western Shaya controlled the northwest, and the Song dynasty governed the south. In 1207, Genghis launched his first major campaign against the Western Xia, seizing their capital after 2 years of siege. When the Shaya appealed to the Jin for aid, the Jin Emperor Wanyan Yongji refused, believing that his 2 rivals destroying each other would strengthen his own position. It was a fatal miscalculation. In 1211, enraged by Jin arrogance, Genghis led his armies over the Great Wall of China. His horsemen moved with devastating speed, slaughtering entire garrisons and razing towns to the ground. By 1213, the Mongols had reached Zhengdu, modern Beijing. Using siege towers and catapults, they captured the city after a year-long campaign, plundering the north and forcing countless Jin soldiers into their ranks. By the time of Genghis's death in 1227 CE, after a brief illness, he ruled a vast empire stretching from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea. His campaigns killed an estimated 40 million people, more than any warlord before or since. Yet he also unified Asia's trade routes and set the stage for a global exchange of goods and ideas. Empire without end. After Genghis's death, power passed to his 3rd son, Ogedai Khan, who expanded the empire westward. In the 1232, the Mongols allied with the Southern Song dynasty to destroy their mutual enemy, the Jin. Once the Jin fell in 1234, however, the alliance collapsed and the Mongols turned south. The Mongol-Song Wars unfolded in two stages. The first 1235–1248 was inconclusive, as the Song clung to the Yangtze Basin. The second 1251–1259, under Genghis's grandson Mongke Khan, was far more destructive. Mongke's brother Kublai proved a brilliant commander, building a navy to navigate China's rivers and using advanced siege engines to breach fortified cities. By 1279, after a generation of warfare, the Mongols crushed the last Song resistance and founded the Yuan dynasty, with Kublai Khan as emperor, the first foreigner to rule all of China. Kublai's empire. Kublai moved his capital to Khanbalik, modern Beijing, and divided the Mongol Empire into four vast khanates. The Yuan dynasty in China, the Golden Horde in Eastern Europe, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. Though his conquests extended to the borders of Syria and Siberia, Kublai's ambitions reached farther still. He launched invasions of Vietnam, Indonesia, and Japan, but his fleets met with disaster. Most famously, the typhoon that destroyed his armada in 1281, known in Japan as the kamikaze, or divine wind. The Mongol peace and decline. Despite military setbacks, China thrived under Kublai's rule. He instituted a rigid social hierarchy, with Mongols at the top, Central Asians second, and the Chinese majority divided into northern and southern classes. The empire's bureaucracy, economy, and trade flourished nonetheless. The Grand Canal was restored, the Silk Road revived, and Buddhism favored as the state religion. Foreign visitors marveled at the wealth of Yuan China. Among them was the Venetian merchant Marco Polo, who spent 17 years at Kublai's court. His detailed accounts of paper money, coal heating, silk production, and Chinese customs captivated Europe and forever changed Western perceptions of Asia. Yet after Kublai's death in 1294 CE, the Yuan dynasty began to unravel. Corruption, failed wars, and crippling taxation weakened its foundations. The final blow came from an invisible enemy, the Black Death. Originating among Mongol soldiers in Crimea, the plague swept through the Silk Road into China between 1331 and 1334, killing 13 million people before spreading westward to devastate Europe. By the 1352, a second wave ravaged the empire. The Yuan's power was broken, and from the chaos, a new Chinese dynasty would soon rise to reclaim the Middle Kingdom. Chapter 8. The Ming Restoration and the Coming of the Western Powers. As the Black Death tore through the Yuan Empire in the mid-14th century, killing millions and unraveling what remained of Mongol control, rebellion ignited across the land. Among the uprisings, one stood out: the Red Turban Rebellion, a movement that began in 1351 CE as a peasant crusade against the Mongols' oppressive rule. Fueled by famine, plague, and floods, the Red Turbans united Buddhist, Taoist, and Confucian followers under the belief that the Yuan had lost the mandate of heaven. At their forefront was a former Buddhist monk, Zhu Yuanzhang, whose charisma and military genius transformed the rebellion into a full-fledged revolution. By 1368, Zhu's forces captured the Yuan capital of Dadu, modern Beijing, forcing the last Mongol emperor to flee north into the steppe. The Yuan dynasty, which had ruled China for less than a century, was finished. Yet its influence endured. It had reopened China to the west, revitalized trade routes, and unified a vast realm that would remain the core of China for centuries. And from its ashes rose one of the greatest native dynasties in Chinese history, the Ming, the Hongwu Emperor and the Ming Ascendancy. Upon his victory, Zhu Yuanzhang declared himself the Hongwu Emperor, founding the Ming Dynasty, 1368–1644 CE. A peasant-turned-ruler, Hongwu built his government on discipline, moral order, and a fierce loyalty to Han Chinese traditions. Declaring Nanjing the capital, he revived Neo-Confucianism, reinstated the civil service examinations, and banned Mongol customs and attire. Under his leadership, China became one of the most powerful nations on earth. The Ming army numbered over 1 million soldiers, dwarfing any European force of the age. Massive public works projects flourished. Irrigation systems, dikes, and canals improved agriculture, while new trade routes spurred economic expansion. The population soared. The arts blossomed as well. The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, one of China's most celebrated literary works, was written during this era, echoing the themes of loyalty and heroism the Ming so prized. Gunpowder weapons advanced rapidly. Cannons and early firearms gave the Ming unmatched military strength. But Hongwu's reign was also one of terror. Paranoid and distrustful, he ruled through fear, instituting draconian laws and grotesque punishments. The infamous lingqi, or death by 1,000 cuts, became a favored execution method. Thousands of officials and suspected conspirators were slaughtered. Yet despite his cruelty, Hongwu's reforms stabilized China for centuries and forged a legacy of order and centralized power. The Great Wall and the decline of the Ming. Later emperors inherited Hongwu's paranoia and obsession with defense. Vast resources were poured into rebuilding the Great Wall, particularly under the Hongzhi Emperor, 1487–1505. The wall's iconic brick and stone sections visible today largely date from this Ming reconstruction, a lasting monument to the dynasty's defensive ambitions. However, the Ming's glory waned in the 17th century. Corruption and inefficiency spread through the bureaucracy, the treasury emptied, and peasant uprisings multiplied. By the reign of the Chongzhen Emperor Rar 1627–1644, the dynasty was collapsing. In 1644, rebel armies led by Li Zicheng stormed Beijing. Facing defeat, Chongzhen hanged himself within the Forbidden City, the final act of the Ming dynasty. But Li's triumph was short-lived. To the north, a new power had been rising for decades: the Manchus, a semi-nomadic people from Northeast Asia. Taking advantage of the Ming's collapse, they marched south, defeated Li's rebels, and claimed the throne. Thus began the Qing dynasty, 1644–1912, China's second and final non-Han imperial dynasty. The early Qing and the Age of Prosperity. The first Qing ruler, the Shunji Emperor, enforced strict cultural assimilation. Han Chinese men were ordered to shave the front of their heads and wear the Manchu queue, a long braided ponytail. Refusal was considered treason. Manchus filled more than half of high government posts to ensure ethnic dominance. After Shunji's death from smallpox in 1661, his son Kangxi ascended the throne, ruling for an astonishing 61 years, the longest reign in Chinese history. Kangxi's era was one of stability, tolerance, and reform. Though a Confucian scholar at heart, he welcomed Jesuit missionaries who introduced Western astronomy and art, allowing Catholicism to spread in China. He restored the Grand Canal, undertook massive flood control projects, and improved agricultural production along the Yangtze River. Industrious, brilliant, and humane, Kangxi became revered as one of China's greatest emperors. His successors, Yongzheng Rer 1000, 722-1735, and Qianlong Rer 1000, 735-1796, presided over continued prosperity. The Qing Empire's borders expanded to their greatest extent. Commerce flourished, and Chinese art, porcelain, and literature reached dazzling heights. But beneath the splendor, trouble brewed. The Opium Wars begin. By the early 19th century, Western powers had turned their gaze toward China. Britain, weakened by its American losses but eager for profit, craved Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain commodities that had become symbols of luxury in Europe. Yet the Qing court strictly limited foreign trade through the Canton system, which confined all European merchants to the southern port of Guangzhou under rigid regulations. Trade was restricted to the winter months. Foreigners had to reside in designated compounds known as factories. Chinese citizens were forbidden from working for foreigners or sharing market information. All ships were subject to official inspection at Whampoa Roads, the anchorage outside Canton. These restrictions infuriated European traders, particularly the British East India Company, which sought freer access to China's vast market. Smuggling soon followed, and their chosen contraband was opium. British merchants imported the drug from India, exchanging it for silver and Chinese goods. The addiction crisis that followed devastated society. Millions became dependent, silver reserves drained from the treasury, and moral decay spread. The Daoguang Emperor, alarmed by the crisis, appointed Lin Zexu, a stern reformer and scholar, to eradicate the opium trade. In 1839, Lin wrote to Queen Victoria, pleading for Britain to end its immoral commerce. His letter was ignored. Lin acted decisively. He confiscated and destroyed 2.4 million pounds of opium, publicly burning it in Canton. The British retaliated. When two sailors murdered a Chinese villager and were shielded from justice by British authorities, tempers exploded. Lin cut off food supplies to British traders, who retreated to Hong Kong. Skirmishes at sea escalated into open warfare. The First Opium War, 1839-1842. China's antiquated navy was no match for British steamships and artillery. Defeat after defeat followed, and Lin was dismissed for his failure to contain the crisis. His replacement, Chishan, negotiated the Convention of Chuanbi in 1841, offering to cede Hong Kong and pay 6 million pounds in reparations. Both sides rejected the agreement, the emperor for its concessions, and the British for its leniency. The war would rage on, dragging China into an age of humiliation that would forever alter its destiny. Chapter 9: The Second Opium War and the Fracturing of Qing China. By 1842, the Treaty of Nanking had already stripped China of its dignity, but the country's ordeal was far from over. The British had lost fewer than 100 men in the First Opium War, while thousands of Chinese soldiers perished. The treaty forced China to pay £20 million in indemnities, cede Hong Kong to Britain, dissolve the Kohong Merchant Guild, and open 5 treaty ports for Western trade. Moreover, British citizens in China were now subject to British law, not Chinese jurisdiction, a humiliating loss of sovereignty. The Qing dynasty had survived, but barely. Its treasury was depleted, its army broken, and its people increasingly rebellious. The rise of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. In this atmosphere of despair, rebellion flared once more, this time under a man who claimed divine inspiration. Hong Xiuquan, born in 1814 near Guangzhou, was a brilliant but impoverished student. He dreamt of government service and devoted years to passing the imperial civil examinations, but despite repeated attempts, he failed each time. After his third failure, Hong suffered a mental breakdown, during which he experienced a series of vivid religious visions. In these dreams, he claimed to have met a heavenly father, clothed in an emperor's dragon robe, who complained that humanity had turned to worship demons. The divine figure handed Hong a sword and commanded him to purge the world of evil. When Hong later encountered a Christian missionary pamphlet, he interpreted his vision as a revelation. The Heavenly Father was God, and his spiritual brother in the dream was Jesus Christ. Convinced that he was the literal Son of God and Jesus' younger brother, Hong began preaching a new faith. He denounced Confucianism, Buddhism, and ancestor worship as corruptions of the divine order. In 1844, he and several followers formed the God-worshipping Society, a quasi-Christian sect that blended biblical themes with Chinese millenarianism. The movement rapidly gained followers, especially among destitute peasants who were disillusioned with the Qing regime. By 1850, the society had tens of thousands of members, and open rebellion was inevitable. In January 1851, Hong declared the establishment of the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace, or Taiping Tianguo, and proclaimed himself its heavenly king. His armies were disciplined, fanatical, and surprisingly modernized. They quickly routed a Qing force of 7,000 men in Guangxi province. Within 2 years, Hong's forces swelled to hundreds of thousands. In 1853, they captured the city of Nanjing after a 13-day siege, massacring tens of thousands of defenders. Nanjing was declared the Taiping capital and renamed Tianjin, Heavenly Capital. The Taiping government was radical for its time. It abolished opium, outlawed foot-binding, and proclaimed equality between men and women. Private property was banned. Land and wealth were redistributed under what Hong described as God's plan. Yet the kingdom's strict moral code also banned alcohol, gambling, dancing, and sexual relations outside procreation. Foreign visitors were both fascinated and horrified by this militant theocracy. Civil war and catastrophe. Internal divisions soon fractured the movement. The most prominent among Hong's lieutenants, Yang Shuqing, known as the King of the East, began claiming he was God's chosen prophet and the only true vessel of divine will. Viewing this as treason, Hong ordered his death. The purge that followed, known as the Tianjin Incident, 1856, was a bloodbath. Over 27,000 people were slaughtered in Nanjing as Hong's forces exterminated Yang's supporters and families. Despite this infighting, the rebellion continued to threaten Qing rule. The dynasty, however, faced another growing crisis: renewed aggression from Western powers. The Second Opium War, 1856–1860, would strike just as the Qing were consumed by internal chaos. The spark of the Second Opium War. The British, joined by France and supported diplomatically by the United States and Russia, sought to expand their privileges beyond what the Treaty of Nanking had granted. They demanded the legalization of opium, unrestricted foreign trade, and diplomatic access to Beijing. The Qing government refused, but the Western powers only needed a pretext. That pretext arrived in October 1856, when Chinese officials boarded a British-registered ship called the Arrow in Canton, accusing its Chinese crew of piracy. The British captain, Thomas Kennedy, claimed that Chinese Marines had insulted Britain by lowering the Union Jack. London's diplomats seized upon the incident as justification for war. The Qing Viceroy of Guangdong, Ye Mingchen, released 9 of the 12 detained sailors but refused to free the remaining 3. Britain retaliated with a bombardment of Canton, swiftly overwhelming the city's defenses. In the chaos, Chinese troops mistakenly attacked American ships, dragging the United States into the conflict as well. By 1857, France had joined the British campaign, citing the brutal execution of a French missionary, Father Auguste Chapdelaine, who had been tortured and killed by local officials. The combined Anglo-French forces besieged Canton again, killing hundreds of defenders while suffering only minor casualties themselves. Ye Mingchen was captured and exiled to India, where he starved to death, a symbol of China's humiliation. The Treaty of Tientsin and renewed resistance. In 1858, the Western coalition, Britain, France, the United States, and Russia, imposed yet another treaty on the defeated Qing, the Treaty of Tientsin. Its terms were devastating. The foreign powers gained the right to establish embassies in Beijing, previously forbidden to foreigners, open more Chinese ports to international trade, sail freely along the Yangtze River, travel throughout China without restriction, receive millions of taels of silver in reparations. The Qing Emperor Xianfeng, enraged by these concessions, refused to ratify the treaty and expelled Western envoys from the capital. Once again, diplomacy gave way to war. At the Taku Forts, a series of powerful coastal defenses near Tianjin, the Chinese army attempted to block the Anglo-French fleet. 3 major battles were fought there between 1859, setting the stage for one of the most devastating invasions in Qing history and the beginning of an age when the Middle Kingdom would be forced to bow to the West. Chapter 10. Fire, Famine, and the Fall of Empire. The battles at the Taku Forts raged for control of the passage leading to Beijing, the last defensive barrier before the capital. Despite fierce resistance and heavy casualties on both sides, the Anglo-French coalition ultimately prevailed. Their path now lay open to the imperial city. In October 1860, foreign troops marched on Beijing, looting as they advanced. When they reached the emperor's fabled summer palace, they set it ablaze. For 3 days and 3 nights, the flames consumed priceless art, silk, and centuries of imperial heritage, a deliberate act of retribution meant to humiliate the Qing. The Xianfeng emperor, powerless to defend his throne, fled north, leaving his brother Prince Gong to negotiate peace. The resulting Treaty of Beijing, 1860, delivered the empire its final humiliation. China was forced to pay further reparations, open additional ports, grant religious freedom to Christians, and most devastatingly legalize opium. The twin defeats of the Opium Wars marked the beginning of what historians now call China's Century of Humiliation, an era when the Middle Kingdom's ancient prestige was shattered by foreign domination. The fall of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. While the Qing court reeled from foreign invasion, the Taiping Rebellion continued to devastate the heartland. Hong Xiuquan's heavenly kingdom expanded rapidly during the 1852, but by the early 1860s, its fortune had turned. The Qing, aided by regional warlords and newly trained ever-victorious armies, commanded by Western officers, regained the advantage. Britain and the United States, once hostile to the dynasty, now backed it with weapons and advisors to protect their trade interests from the chaos of Taiping rule. The war became a campaign of annihilation. Entire cities were burned, crops destroyed, and civilians massacred by both sides. Famine and plague followed in the wake of scorched earth, and desperate survivors resorted to cannibalism in besieged towns. By 1864, the Taiping were cornered within their capital Nanjing, cut off from supplies and starving. Hong's advisors begged him to flee and regroup, but he refused. He told his followers that God would sustain them with manna from heaven, just as he had nourished the Israelites in the desert. The faithful began eating wild weeds, believing them divine food. Hong Xiuquan soon died of food poisoning, a tragic end for the self-proclaimed brother of Christ. In June 1864, Qing forces stormed Nanjing, slaughtering the remaining Taiping leaders and tens of thousands of civilians. Some loyalists set themselves ablaze rather than face capture. Hong's body was later unearthed. His head was severed, his ashes fired from a cannon to ensure he would never rest in peace. The rebellion had claimed 20 to 30 million lives, making it one of the deadliest wars in human history. Though victorious, the Qing dynasty emerged exhausted and hollow, its authority dependent on corrupt regional armies and foreign powers. Japan ascendant, and the Qing in decline. Even as China bled internally, new threats arose from abroad. To the east, Japan had undergone its Meiji Restoration, rapidly modernizing its industry and military under Western influence. The contrast was stark. While the Qing clung to outdated traditions, Japan embraced modernization and soon turned its ambitions toward Korea, long a Chinese vassal state. In 1875, Japan forced Korea to sign a treaty opening its ports to foreign trade, effectively breaking Chinese suzerainty. Both nations stationed troops in the peninsula, and decades of tension followed until war erupted on the 1st of August, 1894. Though the Qing army outnumbered the Japanese 4-1, Its forces were disorganized and poorly trained. Japan's modern navy and professional infantry quickly routed them in a series of decisive victories. By 1895, Japanese troops had invaded Manchuria and the Shandong Peninsula. The humiliating Treaty of Shimonoseki, the 17th of April, 1895, forced China to cede Taiwan, recognize Korean independence, and pay enormous indemnities. Another blow had been struck to an already crippled empire. The defeats of the Opium Wars, the Taiping Rebellion, and the First Sino-Japanese War, followed by the Boxer Rebellion 1900. An anti-foreign uprising crushed by Western coalitions left the Qing tottering on its last legs. Corruption spread unchecked, while modern revolts multiplied. By 1910, the empire faced more than 280 uprisings in a single year. The Revolution of 1911 and the end of the dynastic era. Among these movements, one stood apart: the Revolutionary Alliance, led by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, a Western-educated physician and political visionary. Advocating nationalism, democracy, and social reform, Sun's alliance attracted thousands of students, intellectuals, and radicalized soldiers. They operated in secrecy under the guise of book clubs and social groups, spreading anti-Qing propaganda across the provinces. On the 10th of October 1911, soldiers in Wuchang mutinied, killing Manchu officials and seizing the city's armories. The revolt spread like wildfire. Within weeks, much of southern and central China had declared independence from imperial rule. The Qing, desperate to survive, recalled the retired general Yuan Shikai to command loyalist forces. As the revolution gained momentum, Sun Yat-sen returned from exile and was elected provisional president of the newly declared Republic of China, headquartered in Nanjing. Yuan, seeking power for himself, negotiated the emperor's abdication in exchange for assuming the presidency. In February 1912, the last emperor, Puyi, stepped down, ending over 2,000 years of dynastic rule in China. From republic to warlord chaos, Sun Yat-sen willingly ceded authority to Yuan Shikai, believing unity mattered more than personal ambition. Yet Yuan soon betrayed the revolution's ideals. In 1915, he proclaimed himself emperor, reviving the monarchy that so many had died to end. The public turned on him, and he was forced to abdicate, dying months later in 1916. His death plunged China into the warlord era, 1916–1928, a dark age of fractured provinces ruled by competing generals. Amid the chaos, two movements rose to define modern China: Sun Yat-sen's Nationalist Party, Kuomintang, or KMT, which sought to unify the nation, and the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, born from the intellectual ferment of the May 4th movement. 1919. Though allies at first, the uneasy partnership between the KMT and CCP would soon collapse into a bloody civil war, shaping the destiny of China for the century to come. Chapter 11: War, Revolution, and the Birth of Red China. By the late 1922s, Chiang Kai-shek had consolidated power over a unified China under the Nationalist Party, KMT. Yet beneath this fragile unity, ideological fault lines deepened. The Chinese Communist Party, CCP, weakened but not destroyed, lurked in the shadows. In 1927, after uncovering a plot to overthrow him, Chiang ordered a brutal purge of communists, trade unionists, and leftists, the infamous Shanghai Massacre. Thousands were slaughtered in the streets, and rivers reportedly ran red with blood. In the chaos that followed, CCP leaders debated their survival strategy. Li Lisan urged that the revolution remain in the cities, while Mao Zedong argued that China's future lay with its peasants, not its industrial workers. Mao's vision prevailed. Retreating into the countryside, he began building a new revolutionary base among the rural poor, far from the reach of the nationalist armies. Throughout the 1,930 seconds, Mao's Red Army slowly rebuilt its strength in remote provinces. The Soviet Union, eager to expand its ideological influence, provided limited aid to the fledgling communists. Meanwhile, to the east, another empire was rising. Imperial Japan, driven by militaristic expansion, invaded Manchuria in 1931, establishing the puppet state of Manchukuo. The incursion forced Chiang Kai-shek to divide his attention between the communist insurgency and the external Japanese threat. The Long March. In 1934, Chiang's forces launched a massive campaign to encircle and annihilate the communists. With German advisor General Hans von Seeckt, the KMT adopted a scorched earth strategy, destroying crops, homes, and supply lines to starve the Red Army into submission. Facing certain destruction, Mao ordered a desperate withdrawal. Thus began the legendary Long March, a 10,000-kilometer odyssey across mountains, swamps, and frozen plains. Over 90,000 soldiers and 20,000 civilians set out in October 1934, pursued relentlessly by superior nationalist forces. They endured 15 major battles, disease, starvation, and bitter cold. By the time Mao's column reached Shaanxi province 13 months later, fewer than 10,000 survivors remained. But the ordeal transformed Mao into a revolutionary icon. His tactical retreats, guerrilla warfare strategies, and emphasis on civilian support cemented his authority within the CCP. From their new base in Yan'an, Mao's communists rebuilt, mobilizing peasants and preparing for the next phase of China's struggle, the Second Sino-Japanese War. In 1937, China's fragile peace shattered again. Japanese troops, already entrenched in the northeast, launched a full-scale invasion, capturing Beijing and Shanghai within months. Facing annihilation, the KMT and CCP forged a temporary Second United Front against the common enemy. Chiang Kai-shek reluctantly agreed only after being kidnapped by his own generals in the Xi'an incident, who forced him to prioritize Japan over internal rivals. That July, the Marco Polo Bridge incident marked the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War. It soon devolved into one of the most horrific conflicts in human history. In December 1937, the Japanese army captured Nanjing, then the nationalist capital. What followed was the Rape of Nanjing, a 6-week orgy of violence in which over 200,000 civilians were massacred and tens of thousands of women were raped. Foreign missionaries and businessmen established a safety zone that saved roughly 250,000 lives, but the city itself was left in ruins. Across China, atrocities multiplied as Japanese forces advanced. The ensuing Battle of Wuhan in 1938 raged for 4 months and cost hundreds of thousands of lives, ending in yet another Japanese victory, though at crippling cost to their army. As Japan's supply lines stretched thin, communist guerrillas under Mao waged relentless hit-and-run warfare behind enemy lines. These tactics preserved Chinese resistance until the tide of World War II turned. When the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, Japan finally surrendered. Civil War and Communist victory. Victory over Japan brought no peace to China. With foreign invaders gone, the truce between the KMT and CCP collapsed. The Chinese Civil War resumed in 1945, pitting Chiang's nationalists backed by American aid against Mao's hardened People's Liberation Army. The Communists, commanding the loyalty of millions of peasants, quickly gained momentum. By 1949, Mao's forces captured the last major cities. On the 1st of October 1949, from Tiananmen Square, Mao Zedong proclaimed the birth of the People's Republic of China, PRC. Chiang Kai-shek and the remnants of his regime fled to Taiwan, where they maintained the exiled Republic of China. The Great Leap Forward. Mao's early years in power were hailed as revolutionary triumphs. The land reform movement redistributed property from landlords to peasants, but also executed over 1 million landowners. His next project, The Great Leap Forward, 1962, aimed to transform China into an industrial superpower overnight. Peasants were herded into communes, private farming was abolished, and even cooking pots were confiscated for steel production. Millions labored in backyard furnaces, melting down tools and utensils to meet impossible quotas. The result was catastrophic. Low-quality metal piled uselessly in factories, while food production collapsed. Between 30 and 45 million people perished in the ensuing Great Famine, driven by starvation, disease, and state repression. Reports of cannibalism surfaced as entire villages vanished. Mao was forced to step down as state chairman in 1959, replaced by Liu Shaoqi, though he retained control of the party. The Cultural Revolution begins. By the mid-1962, Mao feared his legacy was fading. In July 1966, he staged a symbolic swim across the Yangtze River, signaling his return to power. Soon after, he unleashed the Cultural Revolution, a campaign to eradicate bourgeois influences and reassert Maoist dominance. Millions of young zealots formed the Red Guards, worshipping Mao as a near-divine figure. They were ordered to smash the four olds: old customs, culture, habits, and ideas. Schools shut down as mobs of students turned on their teachers and elders. The Red August massacres saw more than 10,000 people killed. 27 educators were beaten to death by their own students. Historical relics and temples were destroyed, and chaos consumed the nation. China, once again, was descending into the storm. Chapter 12: Reform, Resistance, and the New China. By 1968, Mao Zedong had once again turned China upside down. The Cultural Revolution, originally launched to destroy enemies of the revolution, had spiraled into uncontrollable chaos. When the Red Guards began to threaten even party authority, Mao finally unleashed the People's Liberation Army to restore order. The same young revolutionaries who had once worshipped him were now branded dangerous. Millions were sent to rural re-education camps, their fervor spent among rice fields and poverty. When the decade-long campaign finally subsided in the mid-1970s, between 500,000 and 2 million people had been killed. Countless more were humiliated, tortured, or driven to suicide. By the time Mao died in 1976, famine, purges, and political persecution had claimed an estimated 40 to 80 million lives. His legacy was monumental yet tragic. A man who had united China through revolution but left it scarred and exhausted. The Age of Reform. Deng Xiaoping's China. Mao's death marked the end of one era and the uncertain birth of another. His successor, Deng Xiaoping, soon emerged as the new guiding force of the Chinese state. Pragmatic and unideological, Deng openly criticized Mao's disastrous policies and sought to modernize China through controlled economic reform. Under his program of socialism with Chinese characteristics, markets reopened, foreign trade expanded, and private enterprise was cautiously encouraged. Rural communes were dissolved, replaced by family-based farming. Factories and businesses gained new autonomy, and special economic zones invited Western investment. Over the next 2 decades, China's GDP increased tenfold, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty and transforming the nation into an emerging industrial powerhouse. Yet political liberalization did not follow economic reform. Beneath the surface of prosperity, corruption and inequality grew. The Communist Party remained intolerant of dissent, a rigidity that would erupt into crisis by the end of the 1980 seconds. Tiananmen Square, a nation divided. In April 1989, the death of Hu Yaobang, a beloved former party leader known for his calls for openness and reform, ignited a wave of grief and protest. University students flooded the streets of Beijing and other major cities, mourning Hu while demanding greater democracy, transparency, and freedom of speech. Within weeks, Tiananmen Square became the epicenter of a mass movement. Students drafted 7 demands, calling for government accountability, an end to censorship, and fair wages for intellectuals. Peaceful marches, hunger strikes, and sit-ins drew hundreds of thousands of participants. By late May, internal divisions split the government between hardliners demanding repression and moderates urging negotiation. Martial law was declared, and troops surrounded the capital. On the night of June 3-4, 1989, the army moved in. Protesters built barricades and set vehicles ablaze, but they were met with bullets and tanks. Eyewitnesses described soldiers firing into crowds and crushing civilians under armored vehicles. The official death toll remains unknown. Estimates range from several hundred to as many as 10,000. Foreign journalists were expelled, and Chinese media were silenced. One haunting image survived. The lone figure of Tank Man, captured by photographer Jeff Widener, standing defiantly before a column of tanks. It became an immortal symbol of human resistance against tyranny. In the aftermath, the Communist Party purged sympathetic officials, executed protest leaders, and imposed strict ideological control. The United States and other Western nations imposed sanctions, isolating China diplomatically. Yet the regime endured, reopening to the world. Despite its global isolation, China's leadership under Deng pressed ahead with reform. The mantra, "To get rich is glorious," became the guiding slogan of the 1,990 seconds. Gradually, trade resumed, sanctions lifted, and foreign investment surged once again. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 left China as the world's only surviving major communist power, but one that increasingly resembled a capitalist economy. Industrial cities mushroomed across the coast, and China's integration into global markets accelerated. The experiment of fusing authoritarian rule with economic liberalization defined the nation's new identity, a paradox that persists to this day. The rise of Xi Jinping. Into this transformed China was born Xi Jinping on the 15th of June 1953 in Beijing. The son of Xi Zhongxun, a veteran revolutionary and early comrade of Mao, Xi grew up steeped in party politics. His father's later fall from grace during Mao's purges taught the young Xi the brutal realities of power. After graduating from Tsinghua University with a degree in chemical engineering, Xi entered government service in the 1,970 seconds. Methodical and disciplined, he rose steadily through provincial posts, eventually becoming governor of Fujian in 1999. His reputation for efficiency and a spotless record amid widespread corruption helped him climb higher through the party hierarchy. By 2007, Xi had joined the Politburo Standing Committee, China's highest governing body, and it became clear he was being groomed for leadership. In 2013, he was formally elected president of the People's Republic of China, launching an era of renewed centralization and control. Xi's rule combined nationalism, discipline, and digital surveillance. His anti-corruption campaign eliminated rivals as much as it curbed graft, while sweeping censorship laws tightened control over speech and media. The introduction of the social credit system, ranking citizens' loyalty and reliability, extended the party's reach into daily life. By 2018, term limits were abolished, effectively allowing Xi to rule indefinitely. Under his leadership, China has become an unmatched economic and geopolitical force. It commands the world's largest navy, wields vast influence across Africa and Asia, and competes with the United States for global dominance. Yet critics warn that this new power comes with renewed authoritarianism and ambitions to reclaim Taiwan, a flashpoint that could define the next era of world history. Epilogue: The Eternal Civilization. Today, over 1.4 billion people call China home, making it one of the most dynamic societies on Earth. Mandarin Chinese, spoken by nearly 1 billion people, is hailed as the language of the future. From the myths of the Yellow Emperor to the skyscrapers of Shanghai, the nation's story remains one of endurance, reinvention, and ambition. As the world watches the next chapter unfold under Xi Jinping's rule, one truth endures. No civilization has shaped human history for so long, nor rebounded from so many storms, as China, a land whose past still whispers through every dynasty, and whose future may once again redefine the world. And so, our journey through time ends here, for now. From ancient empires to the rise of the modern world, we've witnessed the heartbeat of history and heard the language that keeps it alive. Every word you learn is a spark, a fragment of the human story that refuses to fade. Because English isn't just speech, it's memory, it's connection. It's the voice of humanity itself. So as the echoes of the past fade into silence, carry them with you. Keep learning, keep listening, and let curiosity guide you into the next chapter of time. Thank you for traveling with me, your fellow MC Time Trackers. Until we meet again, never stop exploring the epic story of humanity.